Hey everyone, this is Jennifer Beamer, owner-operator of Exercise Diet Art by Science, and this is Fiber Talk episode number 21, and today we're talking about Whitefaced Woodland. Whitefaced Woodland is one of those breeds you probably haven't heard of too much, especially if you live in the United States. Part of the reason is because it is one of those meat breeds that has a very variable fleece and not necessarily something that you would want to import to the US if you live there from the UK. So unfortunately, if you are in the US, finding something like Whitefaced Woodland might be a bit of a challenge. However, as I showed with this particular skein, this comes from World of Wool. If you live in the US and you want to get your hands on some Whitefaced Woodland, you can. This is combed top that I got from World of Wool, got 200 grams, and I've spun it in two different ways, which I'll explain in here in a second. And that was actually a really good way to contrast the fleece that I bought. Well, I didn't quite buy it. This was donated. So basically, I went to the Melton Mowbray Rare Breed Show quite a few years ago in 2018, and that was when I was still living in Leicester before lockdown, and I bought a few other fleeces while I was there. But one of the shepherds who wanted to find out more information how he could market his wool from the Whitefaced Woodlands basically came to us very awkward, clearly outside of his comfort zone, asking us a whole range of questions about how much it would cost to make a sweater, what it would be good for, and I had very basic advice at the time, so I couldn't really expound too much about this breed specifically because I had never spun it before. If you've never spun a wool before, sometimes you can use similar breeds or what you think might be a similar breed and apply that to a situation, and that will give you a really good starting point. But part of what these Fiber Talk episodes are meant to do is talk more specifically about a breed and what I think it might be good for, how I've spun it, what it's like to dye, especially in cases when I have dyed it, and anything I think it might be really useful for in terms of clothing, because that's really, as you know, hand spinners and hand knitters and crocheters and stuff like that, we're more interested on stuff that we can maybe put on ourselves. So I was thinking immediately jumper, something external to the layers of a system, so not necessarily anything next to the skin, but something that would be really useful as an outer layer. So if you are, you know, too warm in the early autumn to put a full coat on, put one of these kind of jumpers on your other layers. You can go outside. If it gets a little bit dirty, doesn't matter. And it seemed like it was going to be fairly hard wearing based on the length of the lock and the way that it felt. So that was the suggestion I gave him. And I also said, maybe find an inexpensive way to do that, because doing everything by hand will really increase the price because you're paying for an expert to do this. And even if we're doing it quickly, having some kind of machined option would be more beneficial for someone who's trying to elevate the qualities of their wool. So let's talk a little bit more about Whitefaced Woodland. In your favorite book and mine, the Fleece and Fiber Source Book, there's a page in the back under Other Wool that talks about Whitefaced Woodland, which comes from South Yorkshire, basically where the Pennine Mountains end, roughly. That's a really beautiful area if you've never been. I've had the chance to go, it's gorgeous. But these are sort of hill breed sheep, and so they're going to be hardier. And the focus on meat means there's not necessarily as much focus on their fleeces, so they're actually quite variable. And they've, in the book, consider them an ancient breed, but I don't really have a date. So it seems like they've been around in the area for a really long time and not had improvements made to their fleeces specifically. So whatever improvements have been made probably relate to the environment, making sure that they can survive in that environment really well, and also for their meat production. So in the book it says the fleeces are quite variable. So they've had here anything from 28 microns to 38 microns, with some kempy bits, especially in the one that I spun from the fleece. This has some of those Kemp fibers that you will spin a lot of them out when you're working with it at the wheel or whatever, but there's still a lot that remains. In the combed top I didn't really encounter any. So in terms of what you're going to get, it's going to be extremely variable. So if you are interested in buying it, it might be worth asking for a sample if someone's trying to sell a fleece, especially if you're in the UK. That would be the cheapest option actually, because these fleeces can be quite large. I only had a third of the fleece because I split it with two. Woo! When it doesn't want to focus because I move around a little bit too much. So this was just a third of the fleece, and I actually still have some of the fleece somewhere, although when I moved I put it somewhere and I can't find it quickly. It's around. So yeah, so I managed to get quite an amount completed. I think it was over 650 grams of the washed spun fleece. So I imagine that the full fleece, I probably could have gotten that amount twice over, which would have been plenty for a jumper, and maybe a couple of hats. So in here it's 4.5 to 6.5 pounds for the fleece, which is pretty sizable. Because it doesn't have quite as much lanolin as finer fleeces, you're going to get more quantity after a wash than a finer fleece at that weight, so you get a big bang for your buck. And then because of the variable micron, what you're going to do with it is actually going to be highly contingent on how it feels. As I said, this Whitefaced Woodland came from a fleece. So because this was a wool show, the fleece was actually really nicely laid out and skirted. And when we were dividing up into thirds, we wanted to make sure that we all had a little bit of the fleece. So we had a bit of the prime and a little bit of the back, like straight down the middle and the back where it gets a bit drier, and then near the sides when it gets more close to the belly, and then on the front and the back end closer to the bib and closer to the breech. So what I did was I just took the whole fleece, carded it all together on the drum carder, made a bunch of bats, and then I spun them so that they would all kind of have a similar feel. And then for this, I wanted a bulky yarn because I anticipated not using this for a clothing project per se, but for a project for my cats. Some of you might be familiar with this particular project. It's Castle Milk Morit that I was going to spin and make a jumper or a sweater. And after I finished, I think it was 750 yards, I decided I don't like this. And it's basically just how it felt when I was spinning it at the wheel. It felt really coarse. I didn't think I was going to be happy with a jumper, so I decided, what else can I make that will be useful? And the thought occurred to me that my cat, Layla, she's a rescue, and you've seen her before on this channel and then on my Instagram. She likes to put things in her mouth that aren't food. I think she might have pica, and so for things like natural fibers, if there is a jumper or a sweater sitting on the couch, or if there's a blanket that's been sort of crumpled up and put somewhere and not actually folded up, it will wind its way into her mouth and she will need it and purr the loudest she ever purrs. So I thought, well, cats love wool. She likes specifically to put things like this in her mouth. So I thought I will knit her a blanket so that I can cover her up in it. I can put it in her carrier when I take her to and from the vet and see how it holds up. So it's held up really well, but you might be able to see right here, there's a couple of holes. And that is literally from her chewing on it when she's massaging it. And this is why I don't like to leave anything out for her to suckle, because she will, and she'll destroy my sweaters and blankets, and I don't want that. So this was one of those wools that I sort of thought would be really useful for outerwear. And given how much she has enjoyed this, and I only have the one, I thought it made sense to use the Whitefaced Woodland for another cat blanket. So for those of you cat parents out there, I think this is a fantastic project. If you want to do like a breed study and learn more about Whitefaced Woodland, it's inexpensive, it's easy to dye, it doesn't take the colors super well, despite it being pretty white once it's been washed. I don't know if you can really tell in this lighting, but this is ever so slightly of a creamy white, not a bright white, like finer fleeces can get really bright white. So it takes dye fairly well, but not quite as saturated or jewel tone as I know this color can get. So it's a bit dull, basically. And the wool itself is a bit dull or matte on the surface, so it doesn't have a lot of shine. So if you are looking something to keep your pets happy, something that you don't care if they rip up because the wool itself isn't necessarily super expensive to buy, then this is a perfect product for you. That said, once you have the fleece, you have a lot more choice than you do with commercially prepared combed top. The Fleece and Fiber Sourcebook has some really great suggestions with every single breed. So for this one, it says preparation and spinning approaches will be dependent on where in the micron range it falls. So if it feels softer, you have more choice. You can maybe even do a long draw, so with Rolax, a woolen style yarn, or a classic worsted one, especially since it's really got a long staple length. It says here between 3 and 8 inches, which is quite variable, but this one I think was about 6 inches. So that's perfect length for combing. So you could get a true worsted yarn with this if you wanted. As well, if you don't want a lot of those kempi fibers, because they tend to be a bit short and more brittle, doing a classic worsted preparation will get a lot of those kempi fibers out. And because it's got a long staple length, and if it's slightly more coarse, so closer to the 38, you'll get a really nice worsted yarn where like the water will repel right off, and dirt, so like if it gets a bit dirty you can just let it dry and then brush it off. It'll stay clean even if you're wearing this outside gardening in autumn or something. So the other thing that's really nice about it is they even suggest doing rugs and ropes and serviceable garments. So basically what I had described about the jumpers, so something that you would wear over other clothing to keep your underclothing clean and safe. And yeah, so with that you can have something that looks nice and could have really great durability, but it won't necessarily break the bank if you need a bigger quantity for the for a jumper. Since I spun this from bats I kind of got a little bit of both worlds. So there's the short fibers and the long fibers, and they're a little bit mixed up in the bat. So this is semi-worsted because I did a worsted draw on it, but I didn't do a worsted preparation. So it's got a little bit of combination of that, you know, soft fluffiness that you would associate with a more woolen style yarn or just spinning from a bat. But then it does have a bit more visible structure in the ply because I did it as a worsted style. And there are some Kempe fibers, but they're falling out pretty easily. Even as I'm holding it, there's bits that are coming out. And also the cat isn't going to really care one way or another. Now, the biggest benefit of getting Whitefaced Woodland as a fleece, you are directly helping your local farmer. And in the UK, I don't know how this is in the US because it's been a while since I've lived there, but in the UK there was the wool price guarantee until 1992 and it was cancelled, and then the volatility of the wool market here sort of expanded and it's kind of degraded to the point where they're about 87 pence per fleece whenever they take it to the wool pool or, you know, to the market, which is actually not a lot considering the costs of feeding, vaccinating, any kind of associated vet bills, you know, any kind of problems with lambing, which is sort of their main source of income, the meat. Then the wool is sort of, well, you're doing it for the animal welfare, but at the same time, you're not getting anything for the effort of doing this. And since owning animals, especially those where you can't get more than one product out of them, it's going to diminish the total breed selection that we as spinners would have available. So genetic diversity is always better for environments than otherwise. So the more we have choice in various breeds and we can use them for select sectors even, for going more on the industrial commercial side, then, you know, one of the ways that we can sort of do that is by supporting those farmers who grow these, who raise these animals. So for me, if you are in a place to get a fleece, buy a fleece. If you want to be a little bit picky because you want this fleece but something you know is going to be good for a jumper or is a bit softer, then you can maybe ask for samples. But a lot of you are animal lovers out there. And with that, you might consider what your animals might enjoy having. And there is a lot of acrylic stuff out there, and I realize this is also an investment of time. However, it's biodegradable. You know where it comes from. You can leave it blank, you can practice your dyeing, you can try new spinning techniques, and at the end of the day, your dog or your cat has something that will keep them warm, keep them comfortable. It smells nice. It smells like sheep, lanolin. And even if they end up ingesting some of it, which my cat 100% does, it's just going to go right through her system. It's not going to cause any problems. So yeah, consider this for pets as well. A little while back, I bought a huge box of combed top from World of Wool, and the goal was basically to try and fill in the gaps where I didn't have any experience working with different types of wools and I didn't have the fleeces. So when I was doing this shopping episode, I saw that they had Whitefaced Woodland, so I went ahead and bought it. Just 200 grams. I don't remember off the top of my head how much it was, but it was really inexpensive. I think it was less than $2 US for 100 grams. With the sale price, I think. So it's really inexpensive, so even if you are importing it and you're worried about the costs, this being relatively inexpensive might also kind of sweeten the deal a little bit for you. But I opted to do a worsted spin and a woolen spin from comb to top. So this one is the worsted, and I did a 3-ply chain or Navajo ply. So I spun one bobbin and then I chain plied it. And I've listed this as a DK or double knit weight. I think that's pretty accurate. There's some bits that look a bit more worsted, which is, it's going to be the difference between 11 wraps per inch versus 12 wraps per inch, so pretty negligible. And then I've got this one, which again, they're both 100 grams. And this one is I forgot to count this one. 102 yards. And I'm pretty sure it's a 2-ply. I'm going to say that and it's not. No, it is a 3-ply. I don't know what I was thinking. If you happen to forget how many plies are in something, literally just take a length of it and unply it so that you can count the plies. It has definitely happened to me before where I've spun something and then I've left it on a bobbin and then I get around to finally doing something with it and I can't remember if it was a 2-ply or 3-ply and whether it was a chain ply. This, I did 3 separate bobbins, so this is a traditional 3-ply. But what I did to make this particular yarn woolen was I took one of my hand cards and I laid the combed top here and then I rolled it into a roll lag. You can do this with combed top that's been commercially done. You can do this for something that's also been dyed. If you've got a blending board, you can make several roll lags at once. But you can spin woolen with combed top. You just might not get quite the same type of woolen yarn that you might if you were working with a fleece, because you would have long and short fibers often mixed in and it would be more disaggregated, whereas this is all pretty much the same length. So it's not quite as fluffy as it might have been if I had done that work from the fleece. But it's a really close approximation to a woolen yarn. It was not the smoothest thing to spin. I think if I did it again, I would probably turn it into a bat and then make roll lags from it, just so that it was opened a bit more and not quite like given to clumping when I'm trying to do the long draw method. So this was my first attempt to do that process where you're working with combed top and turning it into a woolen yarn by making roll lags from the combed top. So for my future Fiber Talk episodes, not necessarily the next one because I think I know which one's coming up next, I'm going to take this as the experiment, and I'm going to do slightly different for that because the whole idea with this World of Wool mini project, if you will, was not just to fill in the gaps of breeds I've not worked with, but to experiment with the woolen, or sorry, the worsted and the woolen preparations of those wools. So I got 200 grams for each of those for that experiment. I've been so sick and I thought I could actually do this video and it wouldn't be a problem, but I've got so much congestion coming out and it's interrupting me like every 2 seconds, and I could, you know, feel it filling up, and oh goodness, so bear with me. Because this particular yarn has next to no Kemp in it. It might actually be more on the finer side. It's really difficult to tell because with commercially processed products, all of the lanolin has been sort of stripped out of it, so it always feels quite dry and a bit dead. And so even though visually looking at these, I would say the woolen and my bat plus worsted spinning style, they look very similar visually compared to the worsted, like true worsted style, which has all of the bumps and ridges of the plies are very, very distinct compared to the woolen. I can tell this one feels a bit squishier. The surface of it is probably slightly more water repellent because I did leave more of the lanolin in it. So it doesn't feel sticky, but it feels like, it's not really a grabbiness. What is the right word here? It feels more like it comes from the animal than this one does. So, yeah, so this one just feels like, I don't know, in the winter when you've got curly hair like mine and it's dry and frizzing and horrible, that's what my hair feels like. So, yeah, so that is one of the drawbacks. If you get commercially prepared wool, it will often feel a bit on the dry side. And there are ways that you can add oil into it that I know some people do, where they'll take olive oil and blend it in while they are carding it or combing it, which you can do with these fleeces as well because it reduces static. But that is definitely something to take into consideration, particularly if you're looking to have an outer layer that has any kind of natural properties like water repellency, because you'll get that with fleeces that you process yourself, not necessarily in the commercial capacity. To round out the discussion of Whitefaced Woodland, I will be posting on my blog and Instagram about the knitting project once I've gotten this video wrapped and published. So if you're curious to see how things are going, if I've got any developing thoughts, you know, follow me on my social media, and then any kind of updates I will definitely put on my blog, which if you haven't read my blog, please do, because there's been a couple of recent posts on my blog that are worth reading. So yeah, have you used Whitefaced Woodland? I'd love to hear your thoughts about it in the comments below. As always, if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. In the description, I'll also have links to all of my socials, my website. I've also now got a Blue Sky account, which I will be using a heck of a lot more than that other site that shall not be named anymore. So yeah, check me out there. And also I've got my Patreon, so if you want to support creators like me who put a lot of thought and effort and dedication into educational programs like these Fiber Talk series, then that link is also below. And if you have any suggestions for future Fiber Talk episodes, or if you want me to do like a review of any of the ones I've done before, because I've been doing the series for a while and I have developed new thoughts over time. So if there's anything you think, hey, could you maybe talk more about this wool from 4 years ago, I can do that as well. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. Bye!